I mean, I can vamp. I can certainly vamp, but I don't mind getting started and just having more time at the end if we want to have questions or if people want to talk about stuff. Like, that's good with me. So if everyone here is cool, let's get started. All right, let's do it to it. All right. Well, then, hello. To those who don't know, I am MC Williams. I'm the host of the Myths Your Teacher Hated podcast. It has been running for about 8 years now. It tells the story of mythology, folklore, and legends from around the world with all of the sex and violence left in. The, the podcast is very much not kid friendly. Today's panel is before 10 p.m., so it will be. We will be keeping it PG-13. We will again, it is mythology, so we are going to be talking on a couple heavy topics, but we will do low flybys. We're not going to get too heavy into it. But you can't talk about, say, Medusa without getting into a little bit of talk about assault and some of the stuff that goes on when gods get a little bit interested in the mortal world.
So basically, we're going Percy Jackson's Greek gods.
Yes, 100%. So before we get started, I do want to talk about our charities. So the digital media track in particular is sponsored by Zakat. For over 22 years, they've been empowering lives through disaster relief, food distribution, orphan care, and more. Their top-notch ratings from Charity Navigator and BBB Wise Giving Alliance means your contributions are going to make a difference. And if you have interest in donating, you can go to zakat.org and get more information there. The DragonCon charity for this year is the Arthritis Foundation, which is the #1 cause of disability. Arthritis affects nearly 60 million adults and hundreds of thousands of children. DragonCon does match up to $125,000 of all donations. And last year, we managed to raise $272,000 for charity. So let's see if we can't match that. There's a bucket up here for any loose change you might feel like giving. So, immortals are constrained by ancient rules, but a hero can go anywhere. Challenge anyone as long as he has the nerve. With these words, the centaur Chiron, trainer of heroes, lays out one of the central themes of Percy Jackson and the Olympians. As you could probably guess, spoilers abound for the 2023 Disney Plus TV series and the 2005 novel The Lightning Thief, and maybe even the 2010 film, but... Exactly. What film? So, Perseus Jackson, or Peter Johnson, son of Poseidon, has been leaping impulsively into danger in defense of his friends over the course of 17 books, spread across 3 different series, 2 movies, and now a TV series, which has officially been renewed for season 2. The books were and are a massive hit. The movie much, much less so. And the show mostly positive, though not without some critique. The book is unabashedly a modern interpretation of Greek mythology, so it should come as no surprise that it draws heavily on classical stories. It should also come as no surprise that the author, Rick Riordan, often takes liberties with the source material, both for his YA audience and for modern audiences. To be fair, there's rarely a true original version in Greek mythology, a topic we'll get into in a little more detail later on. So these changes are often very much in keeping with the ancient traditions of the oral storytelling. So, I'm going to quickly recap Book 1 just so we're all on the same page as far as what we're talking about. Season 1 of the show covers the same basic story, so we'll hit just the highlights. I'm assuming most of you have probably seen it, but just to make sure. Then we'll look at some of the changes made to the existing mythology. So we meet our hero, 12-year-old Perseus Jackson, on a trip to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Percy, who's ADHD and dyslexic, doesn't exactly get along with most of his teachers. I can't imagine why. One of the chaperones, Mrs. Dodds, boo, reveals herself to be one of the Furies, the goddesses of divine vengeance and justice, and attacks him for reasons unknown. His Latin teacher, Mr. Brunner, yay! Tosses him a pin, which magically turns into a bronze sword, allowing Percy to defeat the rampaging monster. Despite the carnage, somehow no one else seems to have noticed the Fury trying to kill him and just running amok. The school year ends shortly thereafter, and Percy's mom, Sally Jackson, takes him and his awkward friend Grover out on a trip to Montauk on Long Island. It turns out that Grover is secretly a satyr, a half-human, half-goat creature, just in time for them to be attacked by the legendary Minotaur. Sally sacrifices herself to save her son, vanishing in a flash of light and forcing Percy to defeat the beast by impaling it with a broken piece of its own horn, which is accurate to at least one version of the story. Grover leads him the rest of the way to Camp Half-Blood, a summer camp for demigods, and, surprise, Percy learns he has a father he's never met, who's a god, though no one seems to know which one for sure, though we can guess from the cover. Percy meets a number of other demigods at the camp, including Annabeth, daughter of Athena, and Luke, son of Hermes. And, another surprise, Mr. Brunner, is revealed to be Chiron the Centaur, the immortal teacher of heroes since the days of legend. During a game of Capture the Flag, the camp is attacked by a hellhound and saved by Chiron, prompting Percy's father Poseidon to claim him. This turns out to be a capital B big deal, because the eldest of the brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, known as the Big Three in the series, swore an oath after World War II not to have any more demigod kids, and they all lied. All of them.
Except Hades.
Kind of. I mean, he is the god of loopholes, so I'll take it. Percy is actually the second kid of the Big Three, but Zeus's daughter Thalia was turned into a tree as she was dying from a monster sent by Hades. This is an even bigger deal than it first seems because of a mysterious prophecy and the recent theft of Zeus's master lightning bolt. The gods are all suspicious of each other and picking sides for the seemingly inevitable war. After getting a prophecy from the Oracle of Delphi, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover are sent on a quest to recover the Master Bolt from the underworld, where Hades has presumably stashed it. Spoiler alert, no. Taking the pin that's also a sword named Anaklusmos, or Riptide, flying shoes, a gift from Luke that Percy regifts to Grover, which is a good thing and a bad thing, and Annabeth's magic invisibility hat, they set out for Los Angeles, where the entrance to the underworld is hidden. Yeah, that tracks. I mean, Vegas is a world of illusion. The underworld is way too real for Vegas, in my mind. It's too heavy. It's too much. I liked Vegas as the home of the Lotus Eaters. I thought that made a lot of sense.
Yeah,
it did.
So along the way, the trio are attacked multiple times by hidden monsters like Medusa, Echidna, the Chimera, and more of the Three Furies. Things get hairy at the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, forcing the trio to retrieve Ares' shield and return for a ride to Las Vegas in a backpack full of supplies. And something unexpected. After getting briefly trapped in a resort run by the Lotus Eaters, like we just mentioned, the trio takes a taxi to LA and the underworld. After making it past Charon and the Cerberus, Percy is nearly pulled into the pit of Tartarus by the flying tennis shoes, where he hears a scary, mysterious voice. The young hero makes it all the way to Hades, Lord of the Underworld, who's looking not for the missing Master Bolt, but his missing Helm of Darkness. Twist. Which makes the wearer invisible and has also been mysteriously stolen, and is different than Annabeth's hat, because we repeat things a lot in mythology. Percy finds his mother, who was whisked away at the very point of death, and he also finds the missing Master Bolt in his backpack, which he definitely didn't put there. Hades threatens to finish off his hostage and reanimate an army of undead. Sweet. Unless Percy returns his helm. Using the pearls from Poseidon, the trio escapes the underworld, washes up on an LA beach, and having escaped one god, they are immediately confronted by another, because that's how Percy rolls. We find, of course, that it's Ares. He was the one who planted the bolt on Percy. He was also the one who stole the missing Helm of Darkness, or at least orchestrated it. Ares declares himself an enemy for life after losing a duel to our good boy Percy. But Percy manages to claim the helm, returns it to the Furies, who've been searching for it this whole time and have just been kind of attacking Percy incidentally, I guess. Percy then takes the bolt to Olympus, which sits on top of the Empire State Building, because of course it does, and return it to Zeus. He also takes the opportunity to tell the king of the gods about the mystery voice from Tartarus, and Zeus dismisses his warning because he's Zeus and that's what he does, but lets him live. Before leaving, Percy finally meets his father Poseidon, and they talk about Sally and family. He returns home to discover that Hades has returned his mother and the box with Medusa's head, which he mailed to Olympus in a fit of snark, which, fair. Before going back to Camp Half-Blood, he gives the box to Sally and encourages her to use it on his terrible stepdad, Smelly Gabe, which also, fair. Sally writes to tell Percy that she did indeed use Medusa's head to turn Gabe into a statue and sell him as a work of art for enough to afford private school in the fall. And if any of you have seen the horror movie Driller Killer, that's basically the plot. That's it. You've seen it. Things seem like they're going great until Percy realizes that the actual lightning thief was his good friend Luke. What? He has betrayed his fellow demigods to throw his lot in with Kronos, king of the Titans and father of the Olympians, in a plot to overthrow Zeus and the other gods. Percy vows to confront Luke and stop Kronos, but, next summer. So, in any adaptation, there are going to be changes. So what did the show change from the book? And for that matter, what did the book change from the original source material? One of the biggest shifts for the show was the larger, more active role that Percy's mom, Sally Jackson, gets to play. Since the book is entirely from Percy's point of view, we can only ever see the things that he sees. The show still mostly follows Percy's adventures from his point of view, but we are treated to some flashbacks of Sally that show that she's a strong, independent woman, as well as showing some of the struggles she faced as a single mother who is secretly raising a demigod while trying to protect him from the horrors that she knows are out there, but can't tell Percy about. I especially love the scene we got between Sally and Poseidon where they discussed exactly why Percy can't know who his father is. It really helps close that loop of why Poseidon has to be so distant this whole time. Like, sure, we know that the monsters will find him a lot easier when he knows who he is, and he's already following a Pegasus up on the school roof at this point, which is a problem. More importantly, both of his parents want Percy to grow up away from the messy family drama that is the Olympians and the demigods of Camp Half-Blood, because if you know anything about the Olympians, they are messy. They are such a messy family, and they all need to go to therapy. To quote Hermes, families are messy. Immortal families are eternally messy. And that is so true. This is especially true of since our hero is a forbidden child of one of the big three, with a prophecy floating around about how he has the potential to bring about the end of the Olympians, which is loosely based on an actual prophecy from the myths about how one of Zeus's children would one day overthrow him the way he overthrew his own father, Kronos. This idea of cycles of being overthrowing and being overthrown in turn was a big motif in Greek mythology. In the cycles of gods and then humans from the Gold Age, the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, and then finally the Age of Heroes, and then us, the Age of Humans. Under the wise but set in his ways guidance of Chiron, the demigod campers learn early to prioritize glory and use of violence as a first resort against almost every problem. Sally goes a different way, emphasizing kindness and compassion. In the book, she names him Perseus, Percy for short, because he's one of the only heroes of Greek mythology to get a happy ending. In the show, it's because he has a strong, resilient bond with his mother, not because he's a famous monster slayer. To quote Sally, not everyone who looks like a hero is a hero, and not everyone who looks like a monster is a monster. Growing up with her as his role model instead of a centaur caught up in the old ways and a checked-out wine god, taught Percy to be different than the other campers, something more than one character comments on. Multiple people talk about how Percy is different from the other demigods. Another major change I mentioned briefly in our recap is the lack of the Hellhound attacking the camp. In the book, this happens right after Annabeth's plan succeeds in winning Capture the Flag. The monster charges out of the forest and nearly gores a very surprised Percy to death. Thankfully, a well-placed arrow from Chiron, centaurs are famously accurate archers, puts the beast down before it can do any real damage. It's a short scene, but one that really ups the stakes. First, it signals that the magical protection of Camp Half-Blood isn't as foolproof as everyone thought, putting all of the campers on edge. Second, it signals that there's a traitor in their midst who's willing to hurt their friends. The theft of the Master Bolt also indicates a traitor, sure, but it's a little more abstract. The Hellhound is much more concrete. It is there. It is hurting people right now. Several hundred pounds of angry charging monster drives the point home pretty concretely. And yeah, a Hellhound isn't exactly from Greek mythology, but it's a cool fire-breathing monster. I get why it's cut, but it would have been a cool scene. The show also manages to fix one of the funniest mistakes in the book while also making a cool villain more menacing. I am, of course, referring to Percy falling out of the St. Louis Arch and into the river. No, it is not. I've been there. It is not close.
No.
See, Rick Riordan just kind of assumed that the arch stretched across the river and never bothered to actually look it up. In fact, as we see in the show, it sits quite a good distance away from the riverbank. Fans have been mocking this moment for ages, taking pictures of themselves on the observation platform with the caption, "I can totally make that jump." We could, as long as you have Poseidon reach out and just snatch you out of the air. So in the book, that very platform is also where we meet Echidna, mother of monsters, and one of the true big bads of mythology, and her beloved pupper, the Chimera. The trio goes to the arch just to sightsee, and afterwards, Grover and Annabeth take the elevator down, but there's no room for Percy, so he waits to catch the next one. That's when the weird old lady and her purse chihuahua reveal themselves for the monsters they are, but I mean, purse chihuahua, and attack, eventually swatting Percy out of the tower for his impossible jump. The show does it a little differently, having Echidna track the trio down for their cross-country train and absolutely wreck it. They barely escape from the cops investigating the apparent terrorist attack, because Percy is a terrorist, as we know, and they flee for the arch, which Annabeth reveals is a secret temple to Athena, assuming her mother will protect them. Except Athena is upset with her daughter for her part in sending Medusa's head to Olympus. Oopsie. And Echidna follows. The mythological Echidna is even more deadly and terrifying than she seems in the show. Her name means she-viper, so of course her lower half is actually a snake, while her upper half is a terrifyingly beautiful woman. Though Aristophanes describes her as having 100 snake heads, so do with that what you will. With her beloved mate Typhon, legit one of the deadliest entities in all of Greek mythology. He is the biggest of all the big bads. He is also equally snaky because the Greeks had a theme and they stuck to it. She is the mother of many of the famous monsters of the mythos. These include Orthrus, a two-headed dog who guards the cattle of the fearsome giant Charon, Cerberus, our good three-headed pupper who graces my logo there, and also guards the gates of Hades, and apparently loves a squeaky toy and a scritch as much as any dog. The Lernaean Hydra, the fearsome beast killed by Heracles, better known as Hercules by the Romans. When one head was cut off, two more grew back in its place. The Chimera, the fire-breathing beast who, like in the show, is part lion, part goat, and has a snake for a tail. Nasty. The Sphinx, the riddle-loving monster with the head of a woman and the body of a winged lion who was bested by Oedipus. The Nemean lion, also killed by Heracles. The Caucasian eagle, which eats poor Prometheus' liver every day. The Ladon dragon, who guards the golden apples in the garden of Hesperides, which is the one that gets Luke. The Cromenian sow, which was killed by Theseus on his way to Athens. The Gorgon, who is the mother of Medusa in some versions. The Colchian dragon, which guards the golden fleece from Jason and the Argonauts. A nameless venom-spitting monster with snake feet, again with the theme, who allied with Cronus during the Titanomachy, or the war between the Olympians and the Titans. And possibly the Harpies, the half-woman, half-bird creatures that also feature in the Argonauts. That is a lot of baddies for one mama. Yeah. There's also possibly, if you've ever read the Iliad, the sea serpents that devour Laocoon at the end. Those might also be hers in some interpretations. Different writers from different times included different sets and subsets of these monsters, so not all of them are agreed upon by any two writers, but any way you slice it, that's a terrifying monster. So instead of soloing this terrifying monster by accident, Percy deliberately sacrifices himself to save his friends, which is his fatal flaw: loyalty. The Chimera is exactly as deadly as he is in the mythos, but Echidna mostly sits back and lets her son Doggy do all the fighting. Lucky for our hero, because Echidna is bad. He's still knocked around and eventually dropped off the arch during the fight to plummet to a certain death, Only Poseidon sends a water sprout to snatch his son out of the air and the relative safety of the river. Yay, I guess. So speaking of Perseus sacrificing himself, another tweak the show makes is with Ares and his missing shield. In the book, all three heroes are sent to the abandoned water park by Ares to recover said shield, which he left behind on a date with his girlfriend. Grover stands guard while Percy and Annabeth head into the tunnel of love, or the thrill ride of love, whichever one you want to go with. Which is when they discover that the reason Ares didn't just pick it up himself is because it was a trap set by Hephaestus. A net drops down, trapping the pair in an abandoned boat, and cameras pop up to live stream their embarrassment to Hephaestus' TV up on Olympus. As if that wasn't bad enough, thousands of mechanical spiders swarm out of the darkness, forcing Percy to summon water from the water park pipes. The pair ride the boat across the rushing waters and into the tunnel proper to make their escape. You see, the tiny detail that Ares left out when he sent the trio on this mission is that his girlfriend is in fact Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. Oh, and wife of Hephaestus, god of the forge and brother of Ares. I told you their family's messy. So yeah, Big H has a bit of a chip on his shoulder about this, and yes, this is lore accurate. Well, to one version anyway. According to Hesiod, Hera was jealous of Zeus giving birth to Athena without her and decided to show him up. In some versions, he does this entirely alone, but in most versions, he actually swallows his previous wife, Metis, when she's pregnant with a child, because one of those pesky prophecies that shows up says that the son that Metis bears will one day overthrow him and take his place as king of the gods, and he doesn't want that, so he eats his wife, like you do. Unfortunately, she's a titan, so she doesn't die that easily, and instead she just kind of buzzes around in his brain as a fly, and eventually gives birth to Athena, who, as a daughter, fortunately does not fulfill the prophecy and is able to burst out of his skull and be happy daughter? ? Hera managed to do this more legitimately without anyone else, but she wasn't happy with the resulting son, Hephaestus, because he was born ugly, weak, and disabled. Usually a bum leg. This is typically depicted as a club foot, though in some versions the foot actually shatters when he's thrown off of Olympus, usually by Zeus, who is trying to protect Hera from the thunder god's unwanted advances. Because you see, Zeus is trying to force his wife, who he's mad at. He's mad at her for having a kid without him, so he tries to, be Zeus. And Hephaestus tries to get in the way, and so Zeus goes, whee! And it's a long way down. Hephaestus was an incredibly clever craftsman capable of making many incredible things. Weapons, jewelry, and even ancient robots. You heard me right. This cunning god made ancient automatons to help him out around his workshop. Handmaidens crafted from gold, guard dogs and lions wrought with silver and gold, and little Roomba stools with golden wheels. And this is all from the ancient Greek mythology. It's incredible. You don't need to make stuff up. They have so much weird stuff. In some versions, he also actually builds himself a self-driving wheelchair, which is actually depicted on an ancient piece of pottery. It is a very cool piece. It's literally just him in a little wheelchair with nothing to pull it. It's super cool. It's one of the oldest pieces showing positive depictions of disability. Seeing his incredible works, Hera realizes that she's been a tad hasty in, throwing a baby off a mountain. She invites him to return to Olympus, but Hephaestus wasn't really interested in going back. I can't imagine why. And so, being petty and shallow, he refused, saying, I have no mother. He knew good and well she only wanted to take him back so he could make her things. Hera isn't used to being told no, so she kept bugging her estranged son. To get her to leave him alone, Hephaestus built her an incredibly intricate golden throne, or possibly adamantine, and had it delivered to Olympus for Hera as a no means no, now please leave me alone. She absolutely loved it and went to sit on it immediately. And if you've seen the show, you already know how this goes. The chair was cursed and engulfed the queen of the gods, making it so she could not stand back up. The other gods tried to break the curse to pull Hera out of the prison throne, but Hephaestus' workmanship was too good. None could budge her, not even Zeus, who once bragged that he could fight the other 11 Olympians single-handedly and win, and none of them challenged him on it because they all believed it was true. Ares, son of Hera, was sent to try and drag Hephaestus back to Olympus and undo the curse, but it's really hard to threaten violence against a volcano god in the heart of a friggin' volcano. With flames and burning torches, he drove back the god of war, which is a part of why the two are not exactly chummy. After Ares' abject failure, Dionysus was instead sent to try and diplomacy instead of threats, which always works better. Big surprise, the god of wine and revelry got Hephaestus super drunk. Convinced the wasted god of blacksmiths that a drunk donkey ride would be totally lit, and then led him back up to Olympus on donkey back with a bunch of cheering party bros to keep him from realizing where they were headed until too late. Zeus orders Hephaestus to free Hera, which is a much more plausible threat now that the younger god doesn't have the power of a volcano sheltering him. On the other hand, Hephaestus is really drunk and feeling more than a little belligerent. Instead of agreeing, he demanded something in return. In one version, he demands Athena's hand in marriage, egged on by Poseidon, who has a very combative, contentious relationship with his niece. As they allude to in the series, Athena is famously one of the virgin goddesses who refuses any sex or romance throughout the mythos. Basically, she's Aro Ace. Her daughter, Annabeth, is literally her brainchild, born from her mind of an intense intellectual connection rather than a romantic or physical one. Given that, it should come as no surprise that Athena reacted poorly to this demand for marriage. Hephaestus doesn't take this rejection well, and not to put too fine a point on it, he sexually assaults her. Being a god of war, she fights him off, though this attack does result in a child after she wipes his remnants off on a cloth and tosses it to the earth, which Gaia turns into a baby. Weird. In other versions, Hephaestus instead demands Aphrodite's hand in marriage in exchange for releasing Hera, which his mother agrees to. In either version, Hephaestus comes off looking like a total douche. Honestly, none of the Greek gods are good people. None of them. Given that she's only married because her parents literally forced her as payment, Aphrodite doesn't feel much loyalty to her husband. She does indeed have a long-standing affair with Ares in the myths. They carry on in secret for quite some time until Hephaestus discovers their tryst with the help of Helios, the sun god, who sees everything. In one version, Ares actually stations a soldier named Electron by the door to warn them if Helios should show up to try to avoid exactly this sort of thing, but he falls asleep. Oopsie. Enraged, Ares turns the young soldier into a rooster, which is why they always crow at dawn. They're announcing the arrival of the sun, just, too late. And as we see in the book, Hephaestus lays a trap for the couple, snaring them while they're in bed together with an unbreakable chain so fine as to be invisible. Literally caught with their pants down, the pair are dragged to Olympus and dropped in front of the other gods naked to shame them. Everyone has a good laugh, and Poseidon persuades Hephaestus to let them go in exchange for Ares paying an adulterer's fine. Also a real thing. In some versions, Hephaestus has his marriage annulled after that, and in others, Aphrodite eventually charms her way back into his good graces. Sometimes she goes back to Ares, sometimes she doesn't. Messy. Very, very messy. Another big one in the show is how Auntie M, aka Medusa, is handled. In the book, the trio finds Auntie M's garden gnome emporium as they're following the scent of hamburgers. Surely that can't be a weird thing in the middle of the woods. Thanks to the subtle magic of the place, this doesn't seem at all suspicious to anyone. The friendly but mysterious woman who runs the place feeds them and gives them a safe place to rest up before asking to take their picture. It's only then that Grover realizes that one of the statues is his missing Uncle Ferdinand, and they realize who they're dealing with. In the show, on the other hand, Annabeth immediately clocks that M stands for Auntie M is Medusa, and being the daughter of Athena, she puts two and two together, particularly given you've got Alecto's fear of entering the place, which gives you a big clue there's a big bad in there, and she figures out what's going on. And while I like the slow burn reveal, it was pretty obvious in the book that the Gorgon was the one in there. All the statues made it pretty clear if you've read any of the mythology. You know who you're dealing with well before the reveal, so I don't feel like changing that really ruined anything. Annabeth's earlier realization does give the show a chance for Medusa to talk about her mythological origins, which I thought was really cool. She alludes to the earlier story I mentioned of Athena being assaulted by Hephaestus, saying that the goddess should have been more supported when it was Medusa who was assaulted. This is one of those myths that often gets contentious on social media, with different people insisting that in the original version, X or Y happens. The problem, of course, is that with, as a lot of mythology, there is no clear original version. There are a lot of conflicting different versions from different writers in different times, and they often refer back to earlier writings that we don't have. We only have their references that so-and-so said this, and we just kind of have to take their word for it because we don't know anything else about it. There simply is no original version because these stories were not really authored. They come from the early oral tradition stretching all the way back to the Bronze Age. And so when you got people telling stories in different places, they're going to change it to suit the local mythology, the local needs, the local culture. And all of these stories are going to change. Then as you have people meeting up and crossing stories, these stories get mixed together and melded and changed. And so you get all of these conflicting versions where they try sometimes really, really hard to retcon the whole thing to make sense, but it never does. When they found a god, when they found a story, or sometimes even a whole new god, they would sometimes incorporate it into their own mythology. The Romans, in fact, were famous for doing this by going, oh, no, your god is just our god by a different name. Although they picked some weird allegory sometimes, like Thor was Hermes. What? But they're convinced Thor was Hermes. This is the case with the Gorgon Medusa. The oldest surviving version we have is from Hesiod's Theogony, where Medusa is one of the three Gorgon sisters, Medusa, Steno, and Euryale, who are in turn sisters to the Graeae, the Grey Hags who all share one eye and one tooth, and in the Percy Jackson universe, drive a cab. Which seems like a great idea. The word Gorgon comes from a Greek word meaning grim, fierce, and terrible, while Medusa's name derives from the word meaning to guard or to protect. In Hesiod's version of the story, Medusa is born a snake-haired monster with massive tusks, bronze hands, golden wings, and a gaze that turns people to stone, but a mortal one, unlike her two sisters who are both immortal, for reasons. They all have the same monstrous characteristics, but because plot hole, we need her to be able to die, she can. Just go with it. She caught the eye of Poseidon, and they had a fling, but having the favor of a god wasn't enough to save her from the mythological Perseus, who beheaded her, just like our Perseus does to Auntie M, while the three Gorgons were sleeping. You'll notice that Athena is nowhere in that story. The other thing you'll notice is that, even in Hesiod, Medusa is a victim. Not from Poseidon. Their tryst seems very consensual, being described as laying down in a soft meadow amidst spring flowers. But the whole, beheaded while sleeping thing. The Gorgons live almost as far away as it is possible to be. They are described as living beyond the river Oceanus on the edge of night, and Oceanus is literally the river that means on the edge of everything. Beyond there be nothing. So they are as far away as they could possibly be. So why does Perseus do it? Well, because his mother Danae had been targeted by the cruel king Polydectes, and Perseus had protected her. In vengeance, Polydectes had invited Perseus to a great banquet where each guest was expected to bring a kingly gift. Horses. Perseus has no horses because he's not rich. So he instead offers to give Polydectes whatever gift he asked for, which is common and always a bad idea. Polydectes asked for the head of Medusa. Since the malicious king was the only thing between Danae and homelessness, he agreed to the quest that was very much intended to kill the young hero. He had nothing personal against Medusa, he just wanted to protect his mother, and as far as he knew, Medusa was a monster. As the show tells us repeatedly, the heroes and gods of Greek mythology saw monsters as always fair game. They weren't people, sentient creatures, or no, they were monsters to be killed. The gods helped Perseus out because they knew that Polydectes was trying to kill the young hero and force his grieving mother into an abusive marriage. And for once, the gods are the good guys. The show instead goes with the more famous but much later version by the Roman poet Ovid. According to him, Medusa wasn't born a monster, but instead a beautiful human maiden, and her hair was said to be her most lovely feature. Ovid is the first time this origin is mentioned, but there is precedent for Medusa being beautiful instead of a hideous monster like her sisters. In this version, she is in a temple to Minerva, the Roman equivalent of Athena. When she caught the eye of Neptune, the Roman version of Poseidon, he descended to the temple, and as the show version of Medusa said, he assaulted her. And the story doesn't even mince words in the original versions, as they sometimes do. Ovid comes straight out and says he violated her. He makes no bones about this. Horrified by the defilement of her temple, Minerva hid her eyes behind her shield, the Aegis. Such an act couldn't go unpunished, but, as we often see with Hera and Zeus, she couldn't punish Poseidon, so it was the innocent mortal woman who suffered further. Medusa's treasure hair was turned to writhing snakes, and her beautiful face became monstrous, and her gaze could now turn men to stone. Auntie M still carries a totally understandable grudge against the Grey-Eye Athena for portraying someone who used to worship her, and especially since she should understand how terrible it is to be assaulted, as we saw with Hephaestus earlier. Worse, Athena was part of the contingents of gods who helped the original Perseus kill Medusa. Hermes gave him a pair of flying sandals, much like the one that Grover gets that gets him into so much trouble, from Luke, son of Hermes, his harpy sword forged by Hephaestus himself, and Hades' helm of darkness, another show artifact which, being the god of thieves and one of the only gods able to freely enter and leave the underworld, he most likely stole in the original myth. Athena gives Perseus a polished bronze shield along with advice on how to safely use it to look at Medusa's reflection, and a kybissus, a magic knapsack capable of safely containing Medusa's severed head once the deed was done. She also told him to seek out the Graeae, the Gorgon sisters, who, as I mentioned, for word on where to find the isolated monsters, because again, being so far away from everyone, just wanting to be left alone, it was very hard to find them. As is almost always the case, god sex with a mortal resulted in pregnancy, so when Medusa's blood spilled, her unborn children sprang forth. Chrysar, a human, and Pegasus, a winged horse. Make it make sense. These are also the children of Poseidon, which is why all of the winged horses in the book can talk to Percy. Plus, Poseidon created all horses as well, so double whammy there. After Perseus uses the severed head to stone his terrible stepdad, he gifted it to Athena, who in thanks set it into Aegis' surface, where it was then carried by Athena into battle. Her blood was gifted to Asclepius, the demigod doctor, who used it to either take the lives of the wicked or raise the virtuous from the dead. In Percy Jackson, the severed head of Medusa is once again used to stonify a terrible stepdad and protect Perseus' mom. Full circle. And I love that the show gives Medusa a chance to finally tell her story. It is a complicated story. It is a messy story because, again, it is always messy. Which brings me to one of the last points I want to discuss. Are modern adaptations even worthwhile? Whenever some big new adaptation comes out, we hear variations on this question. There are those who feel that reworking the familiar narratives of mythology and folklore are barely a step above pure plagiarism. Others feel that any departures from the, quote, original version ruins the story, even though, as we've just seen, there isn't an original story. There are many conflicting versions that all have value to them. On the contrary, adapting and updating mythology to resonate with modern audiences is entirely in keeping with the oral tradition that gave rise to these stories in the first place. As we've already seen in looking at some of the stories that Riordan references and adapts for Percy Jackson, the Greeks and numerous other cultures didn't have the same relationship with stories that we do today. These tales existed for many centuries before they were ever written down. They were performed by the epic poets as entertainment for the people, the blockbuster movies of their day. They were also a vessel to pass down understanding on how the world worked and of the history that had come before. Ancient writers often thought nothing of adding their own understanding or interpretation of stories they were trying to retell. Changes in the stories would be made to reflect changes in the cultural landscape. For instance, the Athenians changing the story of Daedalus, the architect of the labyrinth that held the Minotaur, to make him a local hero instead of a Cretan one. They made him from Athens, even though he super duper wasn't. Other times, it was about making the symbolism and themes of the story better fit the morals of the audience, like with Ovid making Medusa a complex character who had been wronged by the gods as a foil for Perseus, rather than simply an obstacle to overcome, which the Romans had much more of an interest in. That was much more their style of storytelling, of wanting those complex, tragic characters. Simply by translating and telling the stories, we're already adapting them. Choices are always made about what words to use, which ancient writers to use to quote as your definitive source. Look at the relatively recent translations by Emily Wilson for the Iliad and the Odyssey. Even simple choices like whether to use the old-fashioned flowery language or use more accessible, simple, modern language has a huge impact on how the story is received. Who does the author sympathize with? Who do they see as expendable? Older versions of the myths, and often the ones we learn in school, gloss over a lot of the more unsavory aspects of the old stories. Things like the gods assaulting many of the women who became the mothers of the heroes, or many of those same heroes killing innocents and taking them as slaves. Being clear about these kinds of things make modern readers uncomfortable and can make those classic heroes seem a lot less heroic. Riordan, in particular, does a good job of revamping and remixing the old myths as a vessel for his story of a young, dyslexic ADHD hero. The ancient themes of Kleos, of glory, is still important to the demigods, and especially to the gods. But Percy learned from Sally Jackson that it's more important to be kind than to win glory. It's a lesson that would have done poor Luke a lot of good. Once he failed on his one shot at a quest, he was denied Kleos and left dejected and bitter, feeling like the only thing that mattered was now forever out of reach, so what else was he supposed to do? Is it any wonder that his anger became all-consuming, that he decided that the gods were to blame for everything? What else was there for him but revenge? It's why his sword is named Backbiter. It made him an easy target for Kronos in his quest to overthrow the children who had once overthrown him. The stories still use implication and euphemism for some of the heavier subjects, but neither the books nor the show really shies away from making the gods and the heroes complicated. The aspects that make them complicated to modern audiences are different than for ancient audiences, but the Greeks very much saw their gods and their heroes as complicated. They saw them as complex. They saw them as flawed. That was what made them interesting. As Emily Wilson puts it for her opening of the Odyssey about the famed trickster, tell me about a complicated man. That can be Poseidon being both a caring dad to Percy and an abuser to Medusa. It can be Luke acting as both Percy's genuine friend, trying to recruit him, and a cold-blooded killer willing to burn it all to the ground. And it can be Percy being both a genuinely compassionate hero whose loyalty is literally his fatal flaw, and also someone whose impulsive needs to save his loved ones put the entire world in danger. The ancient myths were not afraid of complicated, and neither should we. So at this point, I'm going to open it up to Q&A. Go ahead and line up here at the microphone so that the stream can hear. And I'm just going to vamp until anyone has a question, because I really hope someone does. Because we started early, so we got time, y'all. We have a question, yes. Up to the mic so that, because this way the stream can hear you as well. And feel free to go ahead and line up if you've got a question so we can keep this rolling.
Right here.
There's one right there.
Right here.
So, sorry.
Perfect.
Is there anything in particular that you think should be avoided when adapting mythology, both in form of keeping it respectful to the original myths and anything else, I guess? I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I got you. So as far as what... the only thing I think that really needs to be your guiding light on this kind of adaptation is making sure that you are true to the core of the character. You need to make sure that who the character is doesn't change. The details can change. So like earlier, we were talking a little bit about Epic the Musical. We were mentioning that Odysseus in the Odyssey, his guiding light is Kleos. His guiding light is that I need everyone to know that I am a hero. I need this to be resounded through the ages, which is why when he gets to the cave of Polyphemus the Cyclops, and a bunch of his friends get killed and they manage to escape, he is on the bow of the ship and he cannot help himself but stand up on the bow of the ship and yell out, I am Odysseus, king of Ithaca. And of course, now everyone knows where to find him because you just gave him your address. In Epic, when they change the story, Odysseus is instead very, very concerned about being compassionate, being a good person. And so when he gets to the point where the Cyclops has killed his friends, he needs him to know, because you killed my best friend. You took someone from me, and I need you to know that it was me that did it. I need you to know that the person who did this is the person who was the best friend of the person you killed. It is not it is not for glory. It is for love. It is for friendship. It is for being a kind person in its own weird way. It ends the same way. Poseidon tracks him down and things go real, real bad. But as long as you keep the shining light for Odysseus in both cases is that he loves his wife. He loves Penelope, and he will do anything to get back to her. And in both versions of the story, that remains true. Odysseus will do anything to get home, and it does not matter who he has to go through. He won't be happy about it. Well, I take that back. Odysseus from the Odyssey, at one point, is straight up going, I wish I could just kill you all myself. I wish I could just kill you. Epic Odie is much more sympathetic. He's much more a modern Odie of going, I really want to help. I want to save everybody. Book Odysseus is a general in the most real sense of that. He doesn't care who he has to sacrifice as long as his goal is met. He is a killer. And so, like at the beginning, when Odysseus has to drop a baby off a wall, Epic Odysseus agonizes. He has a whole song about, oh no, can I really do this? Odysseus from the Odyssey, boop, no qualms. Yeetus that fetus. That answer your question?
Yes. I just I thought it was important because often the Greek myths are used very often and not always necessarily with respect to their origins.
Yeah, and I think that there's fairness to that, but I also think that there is, to some extent, like let's take for example as one of the ones that's often very contentious, Persephone and Hades. That relationship is often very romanticized in the modern interpretations because we want one God who's a good God. We want one person who's a good husband. We want one. Give us one.
To be fair, he isn't exactly the worst in that respect.
He's not. But in the original story, he does very much kidnap an unsuspecting Persephone. She is super not on board. But as a contrast to that, there are other conflicting things there. In like some versions, she asks Persephone's dad for permission. He does what was the culturally acceptable thing to do. And also,
which means it's Zeus's fault, as many times it is.
It is often Zeus's fault. That's usually the way it goes. All right, we got some more questions, so hope that helped. Thank you. Yes.
Hi. I was just wondering what you think that Grover staying behind during the thrill ride of love thing and like talking with Ares, what you think that does for both Ares' character and for Grover's character.
Yes. I honestly kind of love that because we get to have this really cool scene where we get to see the wilder side of Grover, the wilder side of nature, as he literally says, red in tooth and claw, because that's one of the things that in the book we get. He's a little bit of comic relief, being scared and eating cans like they're chips. Like it's fun. I love him, but the Grover from the show is a much more complicated character who has a much more complicated motivation. And that whole conversation from with Ares, he's not lying. He does really get it. He does to some level empathize with Ares. He understands this need for violence and how that cycle of clearing away the old to make way for the new is necessary from a natural cycle perspective. And so I think that makes Grover a much more complex character. And it also gives Ares, one, more time to chew on the scenery, and he can chew on all the scenery he wants. He's great. But it also gives him a little more chance to show he's also complex. You see some of his bitterness, some of his feeling like he's being left out, like people aren't taking him seriously anymore, which is kind of a running theme that in the Iliad, Athena just knocks him around. It's a beautiful scene. She just knocks Ares up, down, each way to sideways. And they often don't really take Ares that seriously. And a lot of that has to do with Athena and Athens being the ones telling a lot of these stories. Athena was the patron goddess of the Athenians, and so they made fun of Ares, who was much more a Spartan god. The Spartans didn't write down their stories, so we don't get their side. And so that's sort of why we get that weird dichotomy. And so I thought that was a really cool way to let us see that sort of tension in the characters.
I totally agree. Thank you.
Hi. What are some things that you would have changed when they adapted the book into the show? What would you have done differently?
Oh, what are some things I might have done differently? I don't know. I really, really thought the show made really good choices. Like, there was not really anything that, as I was watching the show, that really stood out to me as like, I wish they'd done that differently. Oh, I wish they like. I was just on the ride the whole way. Was there anything particular you had in mind?
No, not really. I just wanted to know what you thought about
Yeah,
that.
fair enough. No, I think they did a good job.
Thank you.
Sorry. So if I wanted to research how the evolution of mythologies just the evolution of Greek mythology in itself, and possibly how it relates to geopolitical conflict and culture at the time, where would you suggest I start looking?
Oh, that's a lot. There are a couple good websites. Theoi.com does a really good job of compiling a lot of the ancient sources. So if you're looking for a myth, theoi.com, I believe, is the subject title. I'd have to look it up to make sure, but I think that's right. They do a really good job of compiling a bunch of different sources from the old ancient writers and giving you what book it came from, what lines it came from. So it's a really good way to do your first take of figuring out what are even the sources I need to look at. Who are the writers I need to consider? In general, when you're trying to look at if it's Greek and Roman, Hesiod, Ovid, anything from any of the translations of Homer are generally a good place to start.
Thank you.
Hi. So at the end of the lightning thief in the book, Luke gives Percy like a pit scorpion, which from what I've found is not really in the myths. It's like a Magic the Gathering card. So I'm curious what your idea of not like, I don't know if you know if that's from mythology, and if not, what are your thoughts on like including things that aren't from Greek mythology in Riordan's adaptation?
Gotcha. I mean, we mentioned the Hellhound already, which was super not, and I kind of like. The pit scorpion specifically is not, but the idea of the scorpion being a very lethal creature is very much part of that mythos, specifically the myth of Orion the hunter and the scorpion that he chases across the sky. So it is a thing that is very loosely. I think the way the show did it, I actually like a little better. I think it made it a lot cleaner. It gave us a chance to have that really great conflict between Luke and Percy and to have Percy realize that in real time. I get why he made the choice in the book. I do think that's one of the things the show improved upon.
Thank you.
What are some of the ways that the show adapted better than the movie, and that how adapting from books can go right versus wrong?
All of them? I mean, the movie is a product of its time, where the studios were not yet really comfortable letting the people they didn't really believe in genre literature yet. They didn't really believe in genre, particularly YA genre lit, and didn't want to let Riordan have his head as far as being able to do things in a way that made sense. They changed everything in a way that they were trying to make it more viable for what they thought audiences want, and trying so hard to set up a franchise right from the go, rather than letting the story do its work and trusting that people would be on board with the story and be on board with you for wanting to see more. And so I think that was probably the primary problem, is they didn't trust the story they were telling.
Hello. I was wondering if you ever seen the TV show Atlantis and how you feel Medusa was portrayed in that.
I have not seen the Medusa arc on Atlantis. I've seen some, but I haven't seen that.
So she's the main character
Mhm.
throughout most of the first season, and then she's turned into Medusa later, and a lot of that was her choice to save a friend. I was wondering how you feel like that sort of
There is a lot
portrayal
of
of her is different.
there is a lot of, well, not modern, but more modern than Ovid, support for that. The idea of Medusa's head being used as a guardian, being used as a protector, comes from her head being placed on Athena's aegis and being carried into battle. And so it slowly becomes, as cultural mores shift, into being much more of an empowerment story of, you get this sort of interpretation of Athena changing Medusa to protect her. And so that is, I want to say 1800s is when we first start seeing that story start appearing. So it's not an ancient source, but it's an old enough that I don't have a problem with seeing it in the stories. And plus, I do think there is a lot of value in adapting stories to fit modern interpretations and taking things and going, let's break it and see how the pieces work and see if it works in this new genre. So I'm on board with that kind of stuff.
Actually, sort of relating to that one. For more mythologies versus like modern stories, what point do you think where like a modern or modern-ish story starts to become mythology? For example, like a lot Arthurian legends being a more recent stuff compared to the big scale of all sorts of myth. And I think right now there's like argument of like Cthulhian, Lovecraftian stuff. At what point do you think that stops being modern stories and just starts being called mythology?
That's a really, really tricky point that the scholars are fighting about a lot. Because the traditional definition for mythology involves gods and explanations for natural phenomenon. And so that is kind of the breakdown of why you have folklore versus legends versus mythology. Mythology is based off of religion, it's based off of explanations of natural phenomena, it's based on gods and spirits. Folklore is much more stories that are trying to explain why people are the way they are. Why don't you go out into the woods? Well, there's things out there that will eat you. Why don't you trust your step parents? Well, because they're probably going to try to kill you. Things like that. And then with legends, it tends to be real things that have a very small kernel. And so, like with Arthurian legend, there maybe was a king who may or may not have been called Arthur, who may or may not have lived somewhere in a place may or may not have been called Britain. And that's it. And he may have fought a battle where a bunch of people died, and maybe he was responsible. But it got written down as history, and it grew till the people were accepting it as history and then started questioning it. And then it wasn't until the 1300s that you start really getting the romantic cycle of that. And so for the modern stories, I do think that it's hard with the word mythology because people have some very hidebound ideas about what mythology means. But within the context of using it as a cultural touchstone to explain how stories work, how people work, it's a way of us all having a common understanding. So I think it's somewhat fair to say like the Lovecraft mythos or like superheroes being a modern mythology of bigger than life characters who do things we can't. Not because we necessarily believe that they're there, but because it helps explain why we feel the way that we do. It helps us see things on a bigger scale, which helps the smaller things stand out more. And so I think there's some fairness to that.
You.
Hello. So you mentioned that you liked most of the changes that they made from the
Mhm.
book to the TV show, and for the most part, I agree too. But one of the main changes that I wasn't a huge fan of was that they don't technically succeed in their quest at the end of season one. And I was kind of curious if you also didn't mind that change, and also if maybe you had an example of a Greek myth where someone technically failed their goal and still manage to reap some sort of reward by the end of it by overcoming, the bar, I guess, and just like quitting immediately.
Okay. Yeah, that is a fair point, is a complicated point to have. I do think that the show, more than the book, is really trying to drive home the point that Kleos is not as important as the gods want it to be. It's about loyalty. And so them failing the quest, but going anyway, is very much Percy's fatal flaw of like, I have to do this. It doesn't matter that I failed. It doesn't matter that it's already too late. I have to try anyway. And so I think that actually, I don't think that would have worked in the book with the way the book Percy worked. But with show Percy, I think it really makes more sense. It makes a stronger choice for show Percy. As for things where the people failed and still got through, I mean, the Odyssey is full of people failing and still succeeding. I mean, Odysseus fails countless times trying to get in and steal, say, the original statue. I mean, it takes them 9 years of failures before they finally figure out how to get past it. Countless people are dead. There is a whole thing of the heroes needing to overcome adversity, even if that adversity is your own failure. You need to be able to pick yourself up and keep going, or else what kind of a hero are you?
Thank you.
Mhm.
Hi. You mentioned earlier how myths and stories can kind of change over time to like reflect the cultural context of the time it was written in.
Mhm.
And so I was wondering if there were any other moments throughout the series that kind of fit the cultural context of like the early 2000s, but don't really fit the way we view the world now that you would like to see maybe changed or adapted in the series as it goes on.
That's a good question. I didn't do as much research on the later books because I was focused on this one. I did reread Sea of Monsters recently, though. I would like to see Clarice treated with maybe a little more dignity and respect. I think that she is a very complicated character, and I think we've gotten a little bit of hints of that in the show. I would like to see that continue. I would like to see Clarice get the same treatment that Ares and Grover got, of getting a more sympathetic take of she is not just a bully. She is someone whose father believes might makes right, and that is the only thing, and she is having to learn as good as anyone else.
All right. Thank you.
Hi. So speaking of changes, one of the changes that kind of sat with me was Annabeth actually being there to witness Luke's betrayal. So I just want to ask, like, do you think that's a good change, and how do you think that will affect kind of the loyalty and how she viewed Luke? Like, because she views him in a certain way throughout all the books. So how will that kind of change how she views him and their interaction as both Annabeth, Luke, and Percy all together?
I mean, I personally really liked it. I really liked that she got to see firsthand. She didn't have to hear, she didn't have to believe, she knows. And as the daughter of the goddess of knowledge, she needs to know. And so I think that not having that doubt about whether Luke betrayed her is going to make her conflict later so much harder, because even though you know that he betrayed you, that doesn't change what he did for you before. That doesn't change that he saved you. That doesn't change that he protected you. It just makes it complicated. And so I think it's going to make her struggles later on more earned and more sympathetic, because it's going to be harder for her, because she doesn't have to have doubt about whether he betrayed her. He did.
Yeah. Thank you.
First of all, thank you for the panel.
Well, thank you.
My question has a little bit more to do with Greek mythology in general. What stories or storylines or characters from Greek mythology do you feel like would work well in a Percy Jackson story that we haven't yet seen?
I mean, I'm a big Odysseus fan. I would love to see either the Odyssey or the Golden Fleece. I mean, the Argonauts is just ripe for this kind of thing, of all of the heroes coming together to have to do something together. I would love to see something like pulls together from the different series and the different storylines and do a super group where they have to work together to go do something. I think that would be very cool.
Thank you.
Hi, with one season of the TV show done, another season coming out 2025, and the age of the kids, and naturally actors will age. They're trying to do 5 seasons. How do you think they'll handle that? Do you think recasting was most likely, or changing the details for the story?
I'm thinking they're probably going to tweak the details of the story, because the actors are so good. They're so good. And I would much rather have the story change a little to keep them in place and let them grow. So I am hoping that they keep the actors. All right, I think that is about all the time we have. Once again, this is me, Myths Your Teacher Hated. Well, thank you. Sponsor again, sure. Yeah, and I can once more. Our track sponsor is, of course, Zakat. For over 22 years, they've been empowering lives through disaster relief, food distribution, orphan care, and more. Their top-notch ratings from Charity Navigator and BBBY's Giving Alliance means your contributions are going to make a difference. You can find more information at zakat.org. I will be here tomorrow for a panel on folklore and mythology on the stage. That is going to be at 10 a.m. over in Embassy CD. So feel free to find me there. If you picked up any of my cards, the little QR code in the back takes you to all my socials. So thank you all for coming. Thank you. Yes. I do. Mm-hmm.